Welcome back to our coverage this morning of the Budget 2017. It'll happen this afternoon. We, of course, are previewing the event now. We're trying to break it down into sectors as much as we can, and we're standing here on a beautiful morning in Parliament. It's absolutely magnificent here in Cape Town, and thanks so much for tuning in. So let's start off with education. Now, education, of course, we've all seen that is one of the most needy areas when it comes to South Africa, and whenever we hear the budget, we always hear that the largest amount of funds that are allocated through Treasury go to education. But remember that is then broken down into basic education, higher education, and then of course those funds are allocated. But now when we sit and we talk about the fees must fall protests, university students that are demanding this education that they are so desperate for, but at the same time the hands of the universities are paid, how do we find that balancing are tied, I beg your pardon, how do they find that balancing act? Well, we're going to talk a little bit about this, and joining us to uncover exactly what the possibilities are for higher education this year is Dr. Diane Parker. She's the DDG of University Education in the Department of Higher Education and Training. So good to have you on the show. Welcome to Morning Live.
It's a pleasure to be here, Leanne, and welcome to the viewers.
Now, one of the biggest problems, and everybody talks about this, is that the idea of the missing middle is that, you know, you've got the funding when it comes to NSFAS, but then there's the other grouping where they just don't qualify for NSFAS, and then of course we see that high dropout rate. But there's an attempt to get an intervention going. Talk to us about this.
Yes, I think it's been one of those perennial problems. We've recognized it for a number of years now, that there is a huge group of young people, the children of nurses, policemen, teachers and so on, who really find it very difficult to support their children in higher education. And in 2010 there was a ministerial task team that did an investigation into this whole thing to try to understand what the issue was and how we would be able to fund effectively all financially needy students. NSFAS itself focuses on poor students, and so since then we've been trying to find a solution to find sufficient funding to be able to cover this group, the so-called missing middle. And I think last year in 2015 things really came to a head with the protests at the universities. So we put in place a task team to look at a possibility of developing a new model for funding poor and missing middle students. Actually, it's a universal model, but depending on how much funding is available, you'll have to have some cap somewhere, because what we're trying to do here is ensure access to those students who can't really afford to come. That model was developed and we gazetted it in a government gazette last year, at the end of the year. We're currently getting public comments on that, and we're going to be doing a number of workshops to discuss the model. And then also Cabinet approved that we could pilot certain aspects of the model on the missing middle this year. And we've managed to get donations to enable us to fund around about 1,500 students in a number of universities and one TVET college to test aspects of this model. And at the same time we're undertaking a feasibility study with National Treasury, so that probably by September we will have gone through all the details of this, really understand exactly what it would mean, and then have something that we could possibly implement in the next year or two much more fully.
That's fantastic, and it's a vital sector when it comes to those students and those families that desperately need it and that just don't qualify. Expectations for today. Obviously, education, as I mentioned in the introduction, is possibly the biggest sector that gets the chunk of the money. But you know, that's broken down from basic education that gets the most, and then into higher education. But you were explaining to me that that's broken down even further. So from previous years, the 30 billion rand that's normally allocated, what are you hoping for this year?
I think for higher education, university education specifically, we are expecting to get the additional funding that the Minister of Finance mentioned in his medium-term budget speech last year, in terms of covering the students, the poor students in higher education who were allowed to come in 2016 and who were not fully covered, and so that they can continue. There are approximately 55,000 of those students, so they will be able to continue with NSFAS funding this year. And then there is additional funding that's going to be made available available to enable us to pay for the GAP grant for poor and missing middle students. And that's the grant that we're going to make available to pay whatever the increase is in university fees up to 8%, and also in TVET colleges up to 8%. But I think one of the things that we're going to watch with anticipation is whether or not the TVET college section will get additional funding or not, because that section currently is quite underfunded, and that's people talk about underfunding in higher education, but the TVET college system and the community education college system are, even more underfunded.
So that's your hope, more towards TVET colleges. In previous years, and this will be my final question to you, in previous years we've seen students come here protesting, demanding their right to free education, demanding their right to just an education when it comes to universities. This year, have we heard anything? I mean, in terms of, we've obviously there are rumblings of further protests at universities around the country, but do you think that these plans, these discussions and everything that is pending is going to put that down, or is that just not good enough for the students, which my heart tells me it's not good enough?
I think we've been working very hard to engage with students at every angle. We have had many meetings. The ministers met with them, we've met with them as the department, to just untangle any issues that are there, to try to say, look, we've got a situation this year where things have to be solved. We've got the Presidential Commission that's looking into the issue of fee-free higher education training, and that includes TVETs and university education. And then we've got the fee regulatory framework process that's on its way with the Council on Higher Education, and we've got the new funding scheme that we're looking at, and we're appealing to everybody in the sector to say, let's try to have a calm beginning of the year, let's solve these problems this year, and by September this year, the one thing that has to happen is that we have to have a long-term solution for these problems, and we will all work very hard to make sure that happens.
All right, we leave it there for this morning. Thank you so much. Hope all of your expectations are met during this budget today. The big one here, higher education, it's always a main focus, and certainly has pulled a lot of attention from the budget in previous years, and I'm no doubt that this year it's going to be exactly the same. Dr. Diane Parker is the DDG of University Education in the Department of Higher Education and Training. Let's take a break. When we return,